This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Canada Reads American Style. This is Tara and I'm here this afternoon with writer Harman Burns. Welcome, Harman.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you. So, Harman Burns is a Saskatchewan-born trans woman, writer, filmmaker, and sound artist. Her work has been published in Rebelle Zine, Untethered Magazine, and Metatron Press, and her story, Among Strange Machines, was shortlisted for the Far Horizons Award for Short Fiction. Her debut novella, Yellow Bark's Spider, was published in 2024 by Radiant Press. She currently resides in Vancouver on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Welcome again, Harman.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, let's just jump in because I am so excited to read, or not, sorry, I have read your book. And when I finished reading, I'm like, I'm inviting Harman to be on the podcast because I want to pick your brain about your book.
Sounds
So
great.
let's jump in. And why don't you tell us about your book, the inspiration for it, and also the title? Because I love the title and I want to know more about the title as well.
Sure. So, yeah, thank you again for having me. As you mentioned, the title is Yellow Bark Spider. We can circle back to that later. But in terms of what it's about, on the surface, it's a coming of age story about a young kid growing up in the prairies and going through all the trials of aging into adolescence and then into adulthood and discovering that she's trans and then kind of doing the journey home to kind of revisit the past and her childhood in a sense. So on the surface, it's a coming of age story, but really on a deeper level, I think it's a story about memory and how memory is a kind of narrative that we tell ourselves. It's a story that we tell ourselves about our lives. And in the course of our lives, that story can become distorted. It can become sort of edited or erased as we sort of see fit, and certain events in our lives, such as trauma, can damage and impact memory. And so, if we look at a book as a sort of objective narrative, much in the way that memory is, the book is trying to be a kind of mirror of the protagonist's memory in that sense, and hopefully get at memory for other people and readers too, and how we experience that sort of inner narrative. So that to me is what the book about. There's maybe other things in there. There's a lot going on in a little tiny book. I tried to make it as full of ideas as I could. Maybe overshot it at some points, but that's to be decided by the reader. In terms of inspiration for it, definitely there were two sort of, I would almost call them like post coming of age books that I read that were pretty influential to me. One of them was Little Fish by Casey Plett. She's a I don't know if she's still Manitoba based, but at the time it was a Manitoba set story, sort of like, 20 somethings trans women trying to make their way in the world. And then Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead, which was also Manitoba set, actually. A lot of Manitoba representation here. But yeah, those two books just about people sort of really struggling in that kind of post adolescence phase of life, sort of trying to find their way in the world, their place in the world, their identity, struggling with addiction, all these kind of things. That felt like a narrative I could kind of explore. And both those also sort of have the format of having to return home because of some kind of event or crisis that comes up in that process of coming home, then carries all this emotional baggage with it once we left for different reasons, right? We all leave for different reasons. And then another author I would say in general is Cheng Thom, who is a trans writer and sort of healer and activist who writes these amazing books. And her book, I Hope We Choose Love, is like a collection of essays, kind of just about recovery, not only of the self, but also of the community that, I don't know, was very influential to me. And all kinds of other books too, just for writing kind of that pushes the boundaries, I guess, maybe, that kind of, you pick it up and you're like, "Wow, I've never read a book like this before. I didn't know books could do this." Books like Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann, which is, I think, over 1,000 pages, and it's just a single sentence, or the bulk of the book is a single sentence. Just this kind of thing where you pick it up and you're like, "I didn't think this could be done," but it's not just the sort of novelty of the formal conceit, but it's about thought and how we perceive life as this kind of ongoing inner monologue. So it wasn't just superfluous. But anyway, so those kind of things I would say were big inspirations.
Okay, I love that. Before we get to the title, because Johnny Appleseed is one of my favorite literary characters. So I love that you drew inspiration from that book. Casey Plett, I've read one of her books. It was I can't remember the title. It was the short story collection, but that's not Little Fish, right? I don't
No,
think.
A Dream of a Woman, is that the short story
Yes,
collection? Yeah.
that's the short story collection, and I loved that collection. And Little Fish has been on my TBR for ages, so I have to get around to that. I
Yeah, worth
don't know
bumping
if
up.
it. Yeah, I don't. Oh yeah, it will bump up. I don't know if I'll get around to the 1,000-page one sentence.
Yeah, that was a hefty one.
Yeah. However, I know my daughter, my oldest daughter, who is turning 21 in about a week, that would be right up her alley. So I'm going to pass that one on to her for
Excellent.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Duck's Newburyport by Lucy Ellmann.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Now I'll let you get back. How about the title? I find the titles very interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the title is always sort of interesting to me because anytime I do an interview, someone asks about the title, which I think is kind of funny because it was also a bit of I wouldn't say a point of contention, but a point of discussion with the publisher. Where
Hmm.
when the book was accepted for publication, among the first questions asked was, "Would you be interested in changing the title?" And I said, "No." The title came quite a bit before the book actually did, just from a kind of free writing exercise, I guess. And something about it just really just rings in my subconscious in some way. And it's not unrelated to the book at all. It's very much related to the book. And there's a specific sequence in the book which kind of directly makes reference to the title. So I think it's very meaningful, but not in maybe a super linear, obvious way. Maybe not in a super, oh, it's the last line of the book or it's a meaningful phrase that gets repeated. So you make that the title. That's a perfectly fine way to title things, but that didn't feel right for this book. It seemed like it needed something, I don't know, symbolic and obscure, because the book is very much about symbols and obscurity in some ways. So yeah, so it just felt right to me, but I don't know. What do you think?
Uh, Same thing. No, like when I was reading, it just moments would pop out that I was like, "Oh, there's part of the title." You know what I mean? Like it was just
Yeah.
like I see it like here's a little like snippet or a little like treasure of the title, and so it all makes when I finished the book, the title I found appropriate. And
Hmm.
there's no way that it couldn't not be appropriate. It's your book. You title it whatever you want. But it's just a very unusual title in that when I say it in my head, I say it in different ways, like kind of like yellow bark spider, yellow barks spider, and I really like that you
Yeah.
can kind of mess with the title as a reader.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it could be a sentence if we describe the way a spider speaks as barking, which someone might,
Yes.
yellow bark spider.
Yes. No, I love that. So it's fun, actually. It's super fun that way. Um, this leads perfectly into my next question, which is about the style of the writing, which is experimental. Because there's a lot of, so it's a short book, fellow readers, a short book. And often when you say experimental, people uh, they're afraid. They're frightened. They get scared off by it. But it's short. So don't worry. And I also found it's experimental in different ways. Like there's just chunks of it and it just flows beautifully. So, but I want to talk to you about the experimental and why you chose experimental. Did you set out or did it just kind of flow as you're writing?
Yeah, I started writing the book in a very piecemeal way while I was working an office job, and I would just kind of in spare moments scribble down some ideas, or I'd have an image sort of come to me and just kind of write a sort of chapter. And most of those did not make it into the final book, but that was the kind of working process of just kind of assembling these little moments and then trying to collage them together and see if there was a through line between them. And if there
Hmm.
wasn't, maybe I see a chunk there that's missing and I need to write a through line, but then how does that affect the later scene? And so it's kind of this ongoing, like a very additive process of sort of building pieces on. So in that sense, I think the sort of, style changes that happen, there's genre changes that happen, there's things being done with point of view shifts where it might switch to the second person or the first person or third person. So there was part of it that was kind of a natural outflowing of the process that I wrote it, but there's also a part of it where there was a little bit of an intentional it was intentional on my part to at some point to make it sort of like every aspect of the book I can think of, I wanted to kind of play with. So things like point of view, tense, style, genre, grammar, character, all these things I wanted to see how far I could kind of push them.
Hmm.
Because again, the idea of the book, all of these aesthetic ideas were meant to reinforce the themes of the book, which is, this kind of internal struggle of the protagonist to kind of come to terms with something that you can't come to terms with, which is this kind of paradox that most of us in adulthood have to deal with at some point or another, and trying to explore that impossibility by kind of breaking the book form in a way. So I wanted it to feel like the book object in your hands, it was kind of straining to contain itself in some way, much in the way that the character's inner world would be. So any of the kind of, yeah, things where I'm moving things around the page, or there's, much of the first part of the book is written all in lowercase. These are little kind of clues towards thematic ideas.
Yeah.
And you can, like you were saying, I think you said something about finding treasure in the book. That is was kind of the idea that it would be a book that you could read just start to finish in a sitting and kind of just take the sort of the story at face value of the kind of progression through life into adulthood as a coming of age story. But if you wanted to, you could scrutinize it. And I did put enough in there that if you wanted to pull it apart, your time would be rewarded by maybe another layer of meaning.
Oh yeah, totally. I have you here. Can I ask a very specific question?
Please do.
Since I have you. So at the beginning of some of the chapters or the sections, there are symbols like the circles. And sometimes there's empty circles, a circle within a circle,
Hmm.
intertwined circles, completed circles, like blacked in.
Hmm.
Can you speak about the circles? I would love.
Well, what I'll say about them is they were a large discussion um, with the editor and the publisher, and just internally with myself, where the book doesn't have chapters really. It sort of has these sections, and it felt wrong to me to have them numbered because
Mm-hmm.
that sort of implies like a chronology that I didn't necessarily want to attach to the book. So instead, there was a point where I was making drawings for each chapter that were sort of like as a kid would draw them. And that just kind of ended up being visually cluttery. So we played around with all these different ideas. And then eventually I came up with this symbol system, which is a kind of code for the book where you'll notice sometimes the symbols will repeat. For example, the first symbol and the last symbol, I believe, are the same, which is a circle. And there's the line in the beginning where they're singing a song, and the line from the song is "May the circle be unbroken," which is an old bluegrass song. So there's all these kind of little buried meanings of cycles and cyclical nature of memory and thought and the human experience. When the circles are splitting apart, I believe that's where we have some scenes with roommate, that character who's just called roommate. There's some hints perhaps as to her true nature in that. the circle going inside the circle is kind of like a descending deeper into the character. There's the blacked out circle when kind of the character is maybe at her lowest or in a particularly sort of black submerged kind of experience. So these were the kind of ideas going into it, but I don't want to put too much of a stamp on it because people can read into it what they
Yeah.
want to. And the book is richer for the reader's contribution, not just mine.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Thank you. I love that because I really enjoyed the circles and kind of finding meaning in the circles with what I had just read when I looked back. So that's
Mm.
awesome. Now, I'm throwing a couple of questions at you that I didn't prepare you for as we speak.
Oh, please do.
Your language, I found it the experience of reading about kids' experience, visceral. Like your writing engaged all of the senses. Like there were moments when I felt like I was with kid as they were like getting high and then getting sick. And it was intentional, I assume. You want to speak upon that?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. One thing I was kind of battling with this book always was wanting to make sure that it wasn't so strange or abstract that people would pick it up and just kind of be like, what is this? And kind of bounce off of it, which I think still happens, and that's
Mhm.
fine. You know, books
Yeah.
aren't for everybody, but the way that I wanted to try to combat that was by making kids' point of view very strong. And so when you're reading it, you're not kind of hovering above kid like God, sort of watching down on her. There are parts where you are because that's an intentional sort of distancing from the character if she's dissociating or these sort of other psychic states that might kind of induce this separation. But for the most part, I want it to be very much like you're almost right behind her eyeballs
Hmm.
as much as possible. And so that you're almost inside her head, and the book is sort of a manifestation of the inside of her head. And so it's this way to kind of really hopefully draw people in and really make them feel along with kids so that they don't sort of just bounce off of the more abstract elements of the book. You're kind of in it, wrestling your way through it. At least that was the hope. Yeah.
No, you did it. Because I was like, there were moments I'm just like, okay, I'm going to put this out there. I am very naive. I have not done a lot of drugs. I'm like, but with kid, I'm like, I am in this moment. Like it was amazing. So I really really great job of writing those scenes. It was amazing.
Thank you. I did plenty of research.
Obviously, you did not ask me questions about it because I could not help you with that. Um, any future projects? Are you working on something at the moment?
I'm always cooking up a few different things, just kind of at various stages. So I've got some short stories that I'm developing, and yeah, some poems I wrote that are really terrible that should be probably thrown in a fire. Some book ideas that I'm kind of developing. So yeah, I'm currently working on a very long novel that I will probably be done in a few decades. So don't be waiting up for that one. But yeah, there's always something. So yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to argue with you against the poems because when I posted my review on Instagram, I cannot remember the name of the author who commented on my post because I had mentioned that there were poems in the book, and
Yes.
oh, I wish I could remember her name. And so
Her name is
she,
Lily.
thank you, and because I think I've even read her book, and I can't remember the name of that too.
Yeah, her book is Zulaikha or Zulaikha. Yeah.
Yes. And she had drawn your attention to it and had basically said, see, I told you you were a poet. And so,
Yes.
yeah, you are a poet because it's in the book.
Well, I'm
So
a
don't
poet
throw
in
out those
denial.
poems. That's right. Now, my favorite way to end an interview is by asking you what you are currently reading because I love to build my TBR, although you have already done so, but I still. So please, what are you
Okay.
currently reading? What have you currently read? Fill us in.
I've I'm currently reading two books. One of them is called Spirals in Time by Helen Scales, which is a hilarious name for someone who writes about fish and marine life. So yeah, this is a book I'm looking at on the floor right now where it's currently fallen apparently. It's a book kind of about mollusks and things with shells and things like that. So it's kind of a what would it be? It's almost like anthropology in a way too, because it's talking about human relationships with these things like sea silk
Yes.
and the
Oh,
materials we make with these things. So anyway, that's quite interesting. So that's the nonfiction book I'm reading, and the fiction
yeah.
book I'm reading is called House of Chains, which is book 4 out of 10 in a very massive fantasy series written by Stephen Erikson, who is a Victoria-based writer, actually Victoria, BC,
Okay.
which is very cool. So yes, I'm a bit of a closeted fantasy nerd, and this is a pretty massive series I'm currently on book 4 of, and
Yeah.
hoping to read all 10. So
Awesome. That's amazing. Thank you. Harman, before I let you leave, I do want to ask one more question to go back to your book, your novella. Was it difficult to find a publisher for this book? Like for an experimental novella?
yeah, I mean, I certainly expected it to be. I had sort of known many writers who, the process is you kind of send stuff out to as many people as you can, and then you wait a year and you get a bunch of rejections. And that's fully what I was expecting. And I did get a couple of rejections, but I started submitting the book in August of 2023. And in October 2023, I had a response from Radiant
Oh,
Press, my
yeah.
publisher, who was interested. So I think it was a bit of a timing thing because it was sort of like around Thanksgiving. And I think the publisher just kind of had time at home and just sat down and read the manuscript and was like, sure, let's do this. So
Yeah.
I was surprised, but yeah, so it ended up working out well in that way. And Radiant Press has been just a great home for the book because it's based in Regina, the publisher, and this is very much a Saskatchewan book. I grew up in Saskatchewan, and it's written about real places in Saskatchewan. So they were a publisher I was really hoping would be interested. So I was really thrilled when Deborah Bell picked it up. So thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, Radiant Press publishes some great books.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
A bit of a hidden gem. Not completely. Some of the books are actually very popular. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Harman.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
And happy reading, everyone. Pick up Harman's book. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.